Now, the work for hire agreement. I think identifying what a work for hire agreement is critical, and like how it works. When we're recording in a studio, we have several options. Either we are sharing percentages. Okay, either we're sharing percentages along the way, and those could be either up front or in the back. So they could either be, royalties, mechanical royalties, performance royalties, any one of those elements, or even for merchandising, however we decide we want to do that. Or we can essentially have a whole world of, musicians and artists that are part of this, plus the work for hire. And what that means is maybe we're a band, maybe we're a pop group, and we can play and sing, and we can do a lot of things, but we need a rhythm section. We need someone to come in and play piano, bass, and drums. We could offer them percentages, pretty easily, but a lot of times, and most often, they become work for hires. And what the work for hire process is going to do is it's going to allow us to say, we will give you a one-time flat fee up front to own your work, the work that you do, to own your performance. And I should specify your recorded performance. This is very typical for string musicians. It's very typical for the rhythm section. If you ever heard about, I'm a session musician. Well, usually session musicians are almost always doing this. The good news is that flat fee is typically very good. If you're using the union pay scale, so I'd refer you to the AFM website, the American Federation of Musicians. If you're using the AFM pay scale as an example, depending on how long that session is, that individual could be making thousands of dollars on that given day. So depending on, if we're using the AFM, pay scale as an example, they could make, about this much, in a 4-hour block for 4 hours, and that's great pay. Versus percentages that may or may not happen. Unfortunately, in the streaming world, it's a pretty risky situation. It's like you could have $1,000, maybe $2,000 for a weekend today, or maybe wait until your percentage comes up. And that's the thing is, like, if you think about that actually usually isn't the greatest model in the big picture, definitely for ensembles, because let's say they hired 10 musicians, and what's happening with those 10 musicians is everybody's getting a percentage. It's like by the time you split that out amongst everybody, if we had 10 musicians and $10,000 come in terms of revenue that was allowed for those to split, they're still making less, so they're not making enough. So the work for hire allows us to really be able to do that. Now, the downside in the work for hire, technically the work for hire, technically on the work for hire, it is a locked-in agreement. There is no compensation after the initial payment. It allows the work to be rebranded and reused multiple times, but it doesn't allow the work to actually be changed. But there's a lot of ways that it can be altered that are acceptable. But the performance can't be extracted or lifted from the work and put in something else. The ownership does fall to whoever purchases it. So if it's a record label or an artist, it's whoever purchased it owns it, and they'll own it forever. The downside to that definitely is long-term loss of compensation, meaning if that song was a hit and made billions of dollars over the long-term span of its life, there's definitely a conversation around maybe what would those potential earnings have been. But at the same time, the rate that's being offered typically from the union is well in the range of something that you can substantially do something with if you're a regular musician that's getting gigs like this. If you're not, it does make it difficult to really, go out there and do it. But I've been part of sessions where it's like, you're getting paid thousands of dollars to play like 5 of the easiest notes repetitively that you possibly could for a weekend, and you're making really, really good money, and it's a really easy gig. On the other end of the spectrum, though, it is possible, because there isn't necessarily a legal element where if the union locks in a rate. If you're non-union, I mean, the rules of sale apply. You could be paid as low as $1. And it really comes down to what you agree to. And I always advise any artist, any musician to pay well, because we're all part of the same community. So like, if you can pay well, pay well. If you can't pay well, at least give percentages, and don't do a work for hire, give percentages, but if there's no real reason that you should be underpaying musicians to come in and do stuff. And as musicians, there's no reason you should be accepting low payments to go do stuff in the studio. You should make what you're worth, and you should try to level up to that. Because you'll only be kicking yourself later if the work does really well and you just accepted the dirt cheapest, lowest form of payment possible. But this is definitely one of those tricky pieces, where they're essentially going to use your ability to help promote them, and they're going to pay you what you're willing to let it go for. But that's the work for hire agreement, and there isn't really a great way out of or around these once they're done. The big thing I think that is important is the musicians have to know these terms before. It's not okay to have someone show up to the studio and say, oh, by the way, this is a work for hire. If you are ever asked to come into the studio to record anything, it is important for you to understand where you fall. Am I getting percentages? Am I a part of the ownership? Or am I a work for hire? What am I? Like sometimes they'll be like, oh, well, you're just somebody that we know that we wanted to play on it. Don't you want this opportunity? And it's like, well, you could go take that opportunity if you just wanted to have the opportunity to experience it. But for most cases, that opportunity is not really going to be that cool for you. You know what I mean? Like, you'd rather get paid. So in order to do that, you need to have an understanding of what is the pay? What should I expect? The other thing is that in a work for hire agreement, it's not only contracts should be signed before the session, so the contract should be signed before the session and agreed to. Payment should also be ready at the session. Payment is really due upon the completion of the service. So that is something that also needs to be agreed upon. When are you getting paid, where and how? And it should all be buttoned up before the session starts, so there should be no questions, because we don't want the money thing to ruin the actual experience of the session. For either party, we want it to be a great session and everybody gets to perform well, but that means they also have to know what they're earning and what they're getting out of it and what the expectation is when they walk away. And that's it.